Rachel Martinez sat in her car, staring at the email on her phone through tears that wouldn't fall. After 6 rounds of interviews and what felt like countless prayers, the message was brief but clear. We regret to inform you that we have selected another candidate for the senior marketing director position. The dream job at one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious tech companies. Gone. At 34, Ray, as her friends called her, had spent the last decade climbing the corporate ladder, each rung carefully calculated, each move strategic. This position was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the validation of all her hard work and the answer to her prayers for financial breakthrough. The irony wasn't lost on her that just yesterday, during the Sunday service at New Life Community Church, Pastor David had spoken about God closing doors to open better ones. At the time, she had nodded along, confident that her door was about to swing wide open. Now, sitting in the parking lot of the startup where she currently worked as a marketing manager, those words felt like salt in a fresh wound. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her younger sister, Elena. "Did you hear back?" Ray couldn't bring herself to respond. As the eldest daughter of immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything for their children's education, she carried the weight of their expectations along with her own. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Mija, God blessed you with a brilliant mind. Use it to make a difference." She had been making a difference, hadn't she? The small pro bono marketing projects she did for local nonprofits on the weekends, the mentoring sessions with young professionals from her church's career ministry, the financial literacy workshops she led at the community center, all while working full-time and trying to help her parents with their mortgage payments. But somehow, it never felt enough. The 6-figure salary and prestigious title of this missed opportunity would have solved so many problems. A knock on her car window startled her. It was Marcus, one of the young entrepreneurs from her mentoring program at church. He waved enthusiastically, completely oblivious to her current state of distress. Ray quickly wiped her eyes and rolled down the window. "Ray, I'm so glad I ran into you. Remember that idea we discussed about combining business training with community development? Well, I just got a grant to start a pilot program, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be willing to look over the proposal?" She managed a weak smile, about to make an excuse, when she remembered something else from Pastor David's sermon. Sometimes God's biggest assignments come disguised as interruptions. Looking at Marcus's eager face, she felt a subtle shift in her spirit, a whisper of possibility she couldn't quite name yet. "Actually," she heard herself saying, "why don't we grab coffee and talk about it?" Little did Rachel know that this seemingly random encounter would be the first step toward a purpose far greater than any corporate title could offer. New Life Community Church wasn't just a Sunday destination for Rachel. It was her second home. Located in a converted warehouse in the heart of Silicon Valley, the church had become a unique intersection of faith and innovation. Pastor David Chen, with his background in both theology and business consulting, had built a congregation that attracted both tech professionals and community activists, creating an environment where spiritual growth and social impact naturally intertwined. Rachel's involvement had started 3 years ago, when Elena, already a regular at New Life, had dragged her to a women's leadership conference. There she met Sarah Thompson, a former Wall Street executive turned ministry leader, who became both mentor and friend. Sarah's own story of walking away from a lucrative career to start a microfinance ministry for immigrant entrepreneurs had initially seemed radical to Rachel. Now she found herself increasingly drawn to Sarah's peaceful confidence and the tangible impact of her work. The community center where Rachel volunteered sat just 2 blocks from the church, a testament to Pastor David's vision of practical Christianity. The worn but welcoming building housed a variety of programs: ESL classes, job training workshops, after-school tutoring, and most recently, the business development sessions where she had met Marcus. The center's director, James Washington, a retired business professor with a heart for social justice, had become something of a father figure to many young professionals in the congregation, including Rachel. Marcus wasn't the only one of her mentees making waves in the community. There was also Maria, a single mother who had started a successful cleaning cooperative, and Dev, whose tech skills training program for underprivileged youth was gaining attention from local media. Rachel had helped them all with marketing strategies and business plans, never realizing that God was actually preparing her for something bigger through these side projects. The startup where she currently worked, while successful, felt increasingly disconnected from these deeper community relationships. Her colleagues were brilliant and driven, but conversations rarely ventured beyond metrics and deadlines. The contrast between her Monday to Friday world and her weekend ministry involvement had been growing sharper, creating a tension she could no longer ignore. Even her parents, traditional in their views of success, had begun to notice the change in her. Her mother had recently commented, "Mia, you light up when you talk about your community work in a way I never see when you talk about your job." The week following her job rejection plunged Rachel into a crisis of faith and identity. Her initial coffee meeting with Marcus had revealed an ambitious vision, a comprehensive business incubator program for underserved communities, combining entrepreneurship training with spiritual mentorship. The concept resonated deeply with her, but the practical implications were daunting. The grant covered only basic operational costs. Taking on a leadership role would mean a dramatic pay cut, just when her parents' mortgage refinancing was falling through. Her prayers became increasingly desperate. "God, why would you give me these desires to help people if I'm supposed to stay focused on corporate success? And if I'm supposed to change direction, why close the door to financial stability?" The silence that followed felt heavy with uncertainty. Sarah noticed Rachel's distraction during their weekly prayer meetings. "You're wrestling with something big," she observed one evening as they sat in the church cafe. When Rachel poured out her confusion, Sarah's response was gentle but challenging. "Sometimes God allows us to reach for the wrong dream so we can recognize the right one, but recognition and acceptance are two different battles." The battles grew more intense. At work, her decreased enthusiasm caught her supervisor's attention, leading to uncomfortable performance discussions. Her weekend commitments were expanding. Marcus's pilot program needed immediate marketing support. Maria's cooperative was facing licensing issues, and Dev's youth program required funding proposals. Rachel found herself working late into the nights, trying to balance everything while still sending out job applications to maintain her parents' expectations. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Her father, worried about her evident exhaustion, made a well-meaning but painful observation. "You're spreading yourself too thin, mija. These community projects are admirable, but they won't secure your future. The Bible says a man who doesn't provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever." Rachel pushed her plate away, fighting tears. "What if providing isn't just about money, Poppy? What if God is calling me to provide something different?" The silence that followed was deafening. Later that night, unable to sleep, Rachel found herself in her church's prayer room. The empty space echoed with her conflicted thoughts until a scripture on the wall caught her attention. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." "But what does your prosperity look like, God?" she whispered. "And what if it doesn't match everyone else's definition?" While Rachel wrestled with her career direction, other threads of God's tapestry were quietly weaving together. Elena, always the more free-spirited sister, had started bringing their mother to the community center's ESL program as a volunteer teacher. Watching her mother light up while helping other immigrant women master English stirred something in Rachel's heart, a reminder that purpose often ran in unexpected directions through their family. The situation at her startup was growing more complex. A recent company pivot had left the marketing team scrambling to rebrand their product, and Rachel's distraction was becoming more noticeable. Her colleague Michael, who had recently become a Christian through the company's prayer group she'd helped start, kept sending her links to corporate positions that seemed perfect for her. His concern was genuine, but each job listing felt like a temptation to retreat to safer ground. Meanwhile, the community center's impact was expanding in ways that demanded more attention. James Washington had suffered a mild stroke, forcing him to step back from daily operations. In his absence, Rachel found herself increasingly pulled into leadership decisions. The center's board members had noticed her natural ability to bridge the corporate and community worlds, and whispers of a potential leadership role began circulating. Sarah's microfinance ministry was also at a crucial juncture. Several of their loan recipients, including Maria's cleaning cooperative, were ready to scale up their businesses. They needed more sophisticated marketing and business development support, exactly the kind of expertise Rachel had developed in her corporate career. Sarah had begun hinting at a partnership, one that could potentially provide a modest but stable income while allowing Rachel to fully invest in community development. The spiritual implications weren't lost on Rachel. During a Wednesday night Bible study, Pastor David had taught about Joseph's journey from the pit to the palace, emphasizing how God often develops leadership in hidden seasons. Sometimes, he said, what looks like a career setback is actually a divine setup. Rachel had felt those words pierce straight through her corporate armor. Even Dev's youth program was yielding unexpected fruit. 2 of his students, both high school dropouts from challenging backgrounds, had secured coding internships at Rachel's startup through her connections. Watching them transform from anxious beginners to confident young professionals had given her a taste of joy that no promotion had ever matched. The moment everything changed wasn't dramatic. No burning bush, no audible voice from heaven. It happened during a routine Saturday morning mentoring session at the community center. Rachel was reviewing business plans with a new group of aspiring entrepreneurs when an elderly woman walked in hesitantly, clutching a worn notebook. "I heard you help people start businesses," she said softly. "I'm probably too old, but..." Rachel learned the woman's name was Grace, a retired nurse who had spent years crafting natural remedies based on her grandmother's Caribbean recipes. She had helped countless neighbors with her healing balms, but had never considered it could be more than a hobby. As Rachel looked through Grace's carefully documented recipes and testimonials from people she'd helped, something shifted in her spirit. She remembered her father's words about providing for family, but now saw them in a new light. Here was a woman who had been providing healing and hope to her community for years, without any thought of profit or recognition. The next morning at church, Pastor David's sermon was on the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus didn't wait until they had enough money or resources, he preached. He asked his disciples a simple question: "What do you have?" Then he multiplied it. Rachel felt those words reverberate through her entire being. What did she have? Years of marketing expertise, a network of business connections, experience in both corporate and community environments, and a growing passion for transforming lives. That afternoon, she received an unexpected call from James Washington speaking from his recovery bed. "Rachel, I've been praying about the center's future," he said, his voice weak but determined. "God keeps showing me your face. Would you consider taking on the executive director role? The salary would be less than you're used to, but..." "How much less?" Rachel interrupted, her heart pounding. The figure he quoted was exactly what she needed to cover her basic expenses and her portion of her parents' mortgage. Nothing more, nothing less. Later that evening, she sat with Sarah in her office, sharing her growing conviction. Sarah pulled out a document she'd been working on, a proposal for a new hybrid model combining the community center's training programs with her microfinance ministry. "We've been waiting for the right person to lead this," Sarah said. "Someone who understands both business and ministry." Rachel's phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Hey sis, you won't believe this. Mom's ESL students want to start a catering business. They need help with a business plan. Sounds like a job for Super Ray." In that moment, all the scattered pieces began falling into place. The dream job she hadn't gotten wasn't a closed door. It was God redirecting her paths. Her years in corporate marketing weren't wasted time. They were preparation. Her community involvement wasn't a side project. It was her calling. Breaking the news to her parents was both harder and easier than Rachel expected. She invited them to the community center one evening, letting them see firsthand the impact of the work before sharing her decision. Her father stood silent for a long moment after she finished explaining, then surprised her by pulling her into a tight embrace. "Your mother and I left everything in Cuba so our children could be free to follow God's calling," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Who am I to stand in the way of that calling now?" Her mother simply nodded, tears streaming down her face before adding, "Besides, Mija, I haven't seen you smile like this since you were a little girl." The response at her startup was mixed. Her immediate resignation offer was met with a counter-proposal, a 6-month transition period working part-time as a marketing consultant. This unexpected provision would help buffer the financial adjustment while she established the new integrated community programs. Michael, her Christian colleague, pulled her aside after the announcement. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "watching you wrestle with this decision has taught me more about faith than 100 sermons." Word spread quickly through the church community. Sarah organized a special prayer and commissioning service, where Pastor David shared his own story of leaving a lucrative consulting practice 20 years ago to start new life. "Sometimes," he said, "our greatest act of worship is being willing to lay down our own definition of success." The most immediate change came in Rachel's spirit. The constant tension between her corporate life and community calling dissolved, replaced by a deep sense of peace. Even with the daunting challenges ahead, funding gaps to fill, programs to integrate, teams to build, she felt an underlying confidence that she was finally in step with God's rhythm for her life. The first 3 months tested everything Rachel thought she knew about leadership. The merger of the community center's programs with Sarah's microfinance ministry revealed unexpected complexities. Cultural differences between corporate sponsors and community participants created communication challenges. Some longtime volunteers resisted the more structured approach she was implementing. There were nights when Rachel wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But God's faithfulness showed up in unexpected ways. Her corporate marketing experience proved invaluable in crafting compelling narratives that attracted new donors. Elena's social media expertise helped them reach younger entrepreneurs. Even her mother's ESL catering group became a success story that opened doors with other immigrant communities. Grace's natural remedies business became the pilot project for their new integrated approach. Rachel helped her develop a business plan that honored both profit and purpose. Within months, Grace's Garden Remedies was supplying products to 3 local health food stores while maintaining its original mission of community healing. The elderly woman's success inspired others who had assumed entrepreneurship was beyond their reach. Dev's youth program expanded to include business technology training, creating a pipeline of skilled volunteers who helped other community members develop digital marketing strategies. Maria's cleaning cooperative secured contracts with 2 tech companies through Rachel's corporate connections, enabling them to provide living wages and benefits to their workers. The most profound growth, however, happened in the spiritual realm. Rachel found herself depending on God in ways her comfortable corporate job had never required. Each funding shortfall, each program challenge, each difficult conversation drove her deeper into prayer. The daily morning prayer meetings she started for the center's staff and participants became a source of supernatural wisdom and unexpected breakthroughs. One particularly challenging week, when 3 grant proposals were rejected in succession, Rachel retreated to the prayer room where her journey had begun. As she poured out her frustration, she felt God remind her of the feeding of the 5,000, how Jesus had given thanks before the miracle. Following that prompting, she began thanking God for each rejection, each obstacle, each impossible situation. Within days, an unexpected door opened. A former colleague from her startup introduced her to a venture philanthropist who was looking to invest in social enterprise initiatives. The venture philanthropist's interest sparked a chain of events that would reshape not just the community center, but Rachel's entire understanding of God's abundance. Jonathan Chen, no relation to Pastor David, wasn't your typical investor. After a successful exit from his tech company, he had committed his wealth to supporting faith-based social enterprises. His first meeting with Rachel lasted 5 hours. "What you're doing here," he said, walking through the center's bustling corridors, "is exactly what the Silicon Valley model should look like when transformed by kingdom principles." He was particularly struck by how the program integrated spiritual mentorship with practical business training, and how it preserved the dignity of community members as creators and entrepreneurs, rather than just recipients of aid. The possibility of major funding forced Rachel and her team to think bigger. Sarah spent weeks helping them refine their vision. James Washington, now recovered enough to serve as an advisor, helped them identify potential pitfalls. Pastor David connected them with other faith-based community development organizations across the country. But with increased visibility came increased spiritual warfare. The week before their final presentation to Jonathan's investment committee, everything that could go wrong did. Grace was hospitalized with pneumonia. A pipe burst in the center's main training room. One of Dev's star students relapsed into old habits and disappeared. Rachel felt the weight of every setback physically and emotionally. During this time, her father's morning phone calls became her anchor. "Mia," he would say, "remember that in Cuba, we learned that God's power shows up most when we have nothing else to rely on." Her mother organized a prayer chain that ran 24 hours a day, with the ESL students taking the night shifts. The Sunday before the presentation, Pastor David's sermon was from Exodus, the moment when Moses and the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, armies of Egypt behind them, impossible waters ahead. "Sometimes," he preached, looking directly at Rachel, "God brings us to impossible situations not to stop us, but to show us a new way of moving forward." The morning of the presentation, Rachel arrived at the center early to pray, only to find the entire building already humming with activity. Grace, still weak but determined, was there with her healing balms, praying over every chair in the conference room. Dev's missing student had returned, bringing with him 3 other young people interested in the program. The ESL students had prepared a feast that filled the kitchen with the aromas of a dozen different countries. When Jonathan and his investment committee arrived, they encountered something far more powerful than a traditional business presentation. They witnessed a living testimony of transformation. Maria's cooperative members shared how their new contracts had allowed them to move their families out of dangerous neighborhoods. Dev's students demonstrated the apps they were developing for local nonprofits. Grace's customers spoke about how her products had helped their families while creating economic opportunities in the community. Rachel barely needed to reference her carefully prepared slides. The stories being shared were worth more than any financial projection. But the most powerful moment came when her father unexpectedly stood up to speak. "I left Cuba with nothing," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "believing America was the land of opportunity. Today, through my daughter and this center, I see what true opportunity looks like. It's not just about making money, it's about making meaning. It's not just about personal success, it's about community transformation. Jonathan Chen was silent for a long moment after the final presentation. Then he opened his laptop and made a stunning announcement. His foundation would not only fully fund their proposal, but would also provide seed capital to replicate their model in 3 other cities. "What you've built here," he said, "is exactly what the church needs to demonstrate in our time, that the gospel can transform not just individual lives, but entire economic systems." The celebration that followed transcended cultural and economic boundaries. Rachel watched as tech executives and former gang members, immigrant grandmothers and venture capitalists shared meals and swapped stories. Pastor David found her quietly weeping in her office. "When we started this journey," he said gently, "you thought you were leaving success behind to follow God's calling. Now you see that his definition of success was bigger than you imagined." Rachel nodded, remembering the job rejection that had started it all. "That closed door," she whispered, "wasn't a no from God. It was a wait. I have something better." Looking through her office window at the diverse crowd celebrating below, she saw not just a funded program, but a fulfilled promise, the kingdom of God made visible in the heart of Silicon Valley. 1 year after that pivotal presentation, the Impact Innovation Center, as they now called it, had become a model for faith-based community development. The integrated approach of business training, spiritual mentorship, and microfinance had produced results that attracted attention from church leaders and social entrepreneurs nationwide. But the true measure of success wasn't in the statistics, impressive as they were. It was in the stories of lives transformed. Grace's Natural Remedies business had expanded to employ 5 other seniors, creating a bridge between generations as they passed down traditional healing wisdom while building a sustainable enterprise. Dev's tech program had placed over 30 at-risk youth in meaningful tech careers, breaking cycles of poverty that had persisted for generations. Maria's Cleaning Cooperative had become a case study in ethical business practices, proving that treating workers with dignity could be both profitable and transformative. Rachel's own transformation ran deeper than just career change. Her understanding of prosperity had been completely reshaped. She saw now how God's economy operated on different principles, where giving multiplied resources, where weakness became strength, where rejected dreams led to greater purpose. The financial step back she'd taken in salary had resulted in a 100-fold return in impact and fulfillment. Her parents had become integral parts of the center's work. Her father now led a mentoring program for immigrant entrepreneurs, while her mother's ESL program had evolved into a cultural exchange initiative that strengthened community bonds. Elena had left her corporate job to join the center full-time, bringing fresh energy and innovative ideas to their programs. As Rachel reflected on her journey, she understood that the dream job she didn't get hadn't been a detour. It had been divine direction. Every no had been leading her toward a bigger yes. Every closed door had been protecting her from settling for less than God's best. Today, Rachel splits her time between overseeing the original center and helping launch similar initiatives in other cities. The integration of faith, business, and community development has created a new paradigm for urban ministry. But her favorite moments are still the quiet ones. Early mornings in the prayer room where her journey began, thanking God for the dreams she didn't get and the calling she found instead. If you're struggling with addiction, questioning your faith, or wondering if God can use you, know that He can transform any life, any workplace, any situation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Have your own story of transformation? Share it in the comments below. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.